Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our panel on how new partnerships are key to driving the nuclear resurgence. I'm the US energy editor at the Financial Times, which is a London-based newspaper that you probably will best know from its pink pages. And we're expanding our presence here in the United States. So over the last few years, we've really been expanding our coverage of the nuclear industry, tapping into the growing momentum in the US and in other countries behind a low emissions technology that really seems well placed to help alleviate a looming power crunch linked to the AI revolution. Yesterday, we did a big investigative piece on the gap that we are going to see in the amount of power demand that we need over the next 3 years. We worked out there was about a 19 gigawatt gap, 19 AP1000s. So there's a huge challenge here in the United States if we want to win the AI revolution. One thing from the newspaper industry and journalism, I think we're witnessing an astonishing change in sentiment towards nuclear energy. 3 years ago, my predecessor at the Financial Times was writing about how the switch on of Plant Vogel's new reactors was as much a cautionary tale as a new chapter for atomic energy development. And at that time, analysts were speculating about how, we may never see another large-scale nuclear reactor plant built in the United States. Today, the mood is obviously a lot brighter. Tens of billions of dollars of public and private capital are flowing into the sector. Regulation is being adapted to speed up deployment. Within a few months, we should see the restart of the mothballed Palisades nuclear power plant in Michigan. I think that will be quite a symbolic moment for the sector here. And of course, South Carolina is next up with its plan to develop the VC Summer site, which I visited yesterday and which I was very impressed at just the amount of infrastructure that's already in the ground. But of course, as a journalist, we always see challenges ahead. And I think, it'd be naive if we didn't think there are a lot of those, and we've got to try and overcome them. We've got to think about things like how does the industry train the thousands of workers required to build and operate these plants? Which entities will step up to underwrite the construction costs for the new fleets of large-scale reactors and SMRs? And of course, who will shoulder the risks of delays and cost overruns? So my two guests here this morning, I hope are going to provide some great answers to these questions because they are taking a few risks on the sector. We've got Mitch Davidson, Managing Partner and Chief Executive of Brookfield's Renewable Power and Transition Group, and Luca Oriani, President at Westinghouse Electric Company. So these two guys are really two of the architects of this colossal $80 billion deal agreed with the US government aimed at delivering 7 or 8 AP1000 reactors. It's a really unique deal, quite a complex deal, and one which I did struggle to understand when it first came out. So I'm hoping, Mitch, you're going to explain it all to me and everybody out in the audience. So, just tell us the details and the basics of that deal.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. I appreciate it. And first off, I want to express my gratitude for you guys having us here today. Number one, the amount of excitement in the room for the transaction that we closed yesterday with Jimmy and his team. It's just, you can see it. It's very obvious. And we at Brookfield feel the same way about this opportunity. We're very, very excited about moving forward with it. As it relates to the transaction with the U.S. government, quite frankly, there's a lot yet to be decided on exactly how this works. But on a very high level, the $80 billion will be funded by the U.S. government. Now, some of that money will come from outside investors, potentially the Japanese, which is President Trump and his administration worked that transaction just recently and has helped to push this forward. Some of that money will come from Brookfield. Some of that money will come from other outside investors as well. There's a period in which that we have to actually find and identify projects in which this money will be spent. That would then go back for approval, just like any other investment approval that you have with companies like ours, to make sure that that money is being spent wisely and going to the right places. Once that investment is decided and we hit financial investment decision, then the U.S. government will have an opportunity to have an ownership within Westinghouse as that money is deployed towards new nuclear projects. Anywhere, you've heard it today, up to 10 projects could be built off of this. Some of that money could be used for VC summer or not. It's not necessarily contingent or tied to these projects. Once that happens, and Westinghouse, there's a certain threshold in there. I think it's around $17.5 billion of revenue that has to come off of the business back to the original owners. And then the U.S. government's 20% kicks in. And at that point, there's a potential for an IPO. And there's all kinds of things that can happen between here and there. A lot of this is all already known. There's like any other transaction, the details are yet to be nailed down in specifics and dates and times, but all something the team at Brookfield is working on right now to close. And the key to it is more investment in new nuclear in the U.S. and hopefully the beginning of the renaissance you've heard about and we've talked about all day long.
And this partnership structure, this is a completely new way of doing things. And is it really the only way we're going to get over the risk issues with nuclear in the United States? And is that why you've done it?
It's a good question. Look, I've been in this business since the early 90s, and I've held a lot of different positions, and I've been CEOs for a number of different companies. And throughout my entire career, I have tried to find ways to build new nuclear. And as you heard from John in the earlier panel, the old way doesn't work. Going through the regulatory environment and going through multiple different public utility commissions to get approval to spend money to build new nuclear is a failed model. It has to be private investment, and it has to be companies like Brookfield or others that come in and are willing to put money at risk. But this new paradigm is going to be shared risk. Everyone has to share some part of this risk. There's not one single entity that can take it on. You heard earlier that NextEra is one of the largest utilities in the nation, and they can't take it on by themselves. I ran their unregulated business for 6 years. I could tell you, we couldn't crack the code. This is the first step to making it work. We get VC summer right. We're able to execute on the government deal and start getting multiple. I'm not talking one. This isn't about one nuclear power plant or 2 units. This is about a fleet of nuclear power plants. And as we start getting multiple power plants in the design and construction phase, a lot of the unknown, a lot of the risks will start getting wrung out of that equation. And then after we've built 10 of these, maybe they're right in the earlier panel. Maybe we do go back to a process where utilities are able to get it, and then the risk is known and PUCs are able to take on and willing to pass it through the ratepayers. But quite frankly, I think at that point, you'll have other investors outside, like Brookfield, that are willing to build these things and own them and be a part of it.
And Luca, you've actually been involved in deploying AP1000s all over the world. So what does this partnership mean in terms of reshaping the economics of the deployment of this reactor?
Yeah, I think as Mitch and others on the panel are saying, this risk-sharing approach is more than just financial. It actually drives the behavior and the approach on the project. When you think about these plants, these VC summer plants will operate deep into the 22nd century. So just put it in perspective, what you're really building is energy and jobs for over 100 years into the future. As you build this project, these are complex projects. They have a number of stakeholders. They have your equipment supplier. They have the engineer that provides the blueprint. They have the construction craft. They have the regulator, the federal and state regulators, and stability of those processes is so important. And they have then the off-takers, the hyperscalers that contribute both in terms of power acquisition, but also in terms of providing the technology, empowering the workers to build them fast. A model that shares risks. The term we have used in the last year is everybody suffers, nobody dies. That's one of the problems of old projects done in this country. They were all based on one person, one entity, one stakeholder taking all the risk, and everybody else profiting until that stakeholder would inevitably topple and then start a spiral in which it keeps moving to another one. An approach in which there's a incentive risk reward that is shared above the stakeholder is how you actually develop projects that are effective in their execution. And the results are there to be seen, right? I think if we ask to this audience if they consider the first AP1000 wave in the United States with Vogel VC Summer successful, I think not one hand would probably rise. You ask the same question about the Chinese nuclear program, you would probably get a lot of hands raising here. There's only 10% difference in the schedule of those first Chinese units and what was achieved in the United States. There's a 10% difference. The problem is we didn't build a system to actually let you build those new plants. The Chinese, just going from the first to the third units, went down 60% on their schedule. We're going to do exactly the same as long as we can deploy those technology at scale and industrialize. You never ask the US Navy how much the first aircraft carrier cost. You ask them what's the average cost of 6.
So that begs the question, how did the Chinese do it? And what do we need to do to maybe standardize the process here? What did they do different, I guess?
So same thing we did. You don't keep doing first of a kind because a first of a kind project, it's going to cost you between 2 and 3 times what's an nth of a kind, the ultimate result of that. What they are doing is they are just keeping in building it. One of the things we learned, and we learned a lot of, most of what I know is not because I'm smart, it's because I've done it wrong multiple times before. But one thing that you learn is that you don't have a design until you have built something once. I mean, you look at these plants, there's 3 million feet of cables in one of these plants. There are 200,000 individual terminations, 33 kilometers of pipes in these plants. Until you design and you build it, the construction doesn't know how to. You haven't resolved those problems. What they do is just discipline. Just keep building the same plant, and after you have built a fleet of them, then you start thinking about what do you want to change. And that's really where the advantage of the United States comes, because the United States realized probably 30 years before other countries that nuclear was on a trajectory in which it would become non-competitive. We were increasing safety level, but we were adding steel, concrete, components to the plants, which means that you're making it safer by making it more expensive, and that's going to break. Today, we have a technology with the AP1000 that requires 1/3 the concrete and the steel per megawatt compared to any French, Korean, or Chinese reactor that is not an AP1000.
Hey, Luca, you mentioned it, but I think it's important to really kind of stress the Chinese have set up a process where they're building multiple units, and all of the variables that go into that, including long lead time items, all the supply required to get those projects built on time, on schedule, on budget, has been put in place. You can't do it with one unit. You have to have multiple units going at a time to get there.
And that's where that United States government deal comes. It's separating the making of component, industrializing your supply chain. And that's the beauty of this technology is it's built very similar to how we build ships. In this country, we're still really, really good at building ships. Steel modular construction moves a lot of the jobs to not be focused in one location, but distributed on your industrial base. And it's shops from Texas to Virginia to the Carolinas. And that's also the beauty of this project in the South Carolina. It's right in the middle of all that, the manufacturing chain in the United States.
It seems to me, we had the plant Vogel, 2 units. We set up a bit of a supply chain. We got the labor in place, and then we just stopped. So how do we get the supply chain back and the labor back? I mean, that must be a gargantuan challenge right now.
So we didn't stop. That's the key things. There's still plants that are being built in Poland. There's projects ongoing in Bulgaria. There's interaction we have had with the Ukraine planning for their reconstruction after the war. There's components we have kept making for the Chinese units. There's a lot of components, because of the nature of the AP1000, a lot of components at our own factories that we have kept expanding to support nuclear power in the United States. I think there were some data shared that I just wanted. Sometimes the importance of South Carolina is also underestimated. It's not 10% of the nuclear electricity that goes through South Carolina. It's 10% of all United States electricity. It's over 60% of nuclear electricity. And so you see those expansion program in our Columbia fuel manufacturing factory. That's the largest fuel manufacturing factory in the United States. All those investments have started, but that's where the U.S. government comes into a key player, which is allow the starting industrialization of those kits. The accent is Italian, so it's a difference between make Ferraris and Fords. Ferraris are really nice machines, but it's not the most effective way of going from point A to point B.
And Mitch, one idea that I've heard circulating about this, obviously with Vogel, it went over budget a lot, and there was long delays, but there was this idea of cost overrun risk insurance, this idea of trying to, get the government to step in and backstop the building of reactors. Is that idea going to fly?
Look, I think what we were talking about earlier is going to be the real solution of this. Cost overrun insurance may be a thing that we can actually get at some point, but you got to look at the cost of that and whether it makes sense or not. It's really taking that cost overrun risk and spreading it among all or most of the participants. Many of you right here in this room today have companies that will benefit from these projects. Some of the transactions or negotiations you'll have is if you're able to construct, build, pour the concrete, bring in the electrical components, the resources to do it on time, on schedule, you get benefit from that. If you go over your budget based off of your own performance, you're going to take some of the risk associated with that. That's how this is going to work at the end of the day. Now, even I would sell you cost over an insurance at a price, right? Brookfield, but you're not going to want to pay it. We're going to all want. This is going to be one of those where we all rise with the ship, we all sink with the ship, kind of analogy.
Yeah, and let's talk about the reactor itself. And Luca, you're a real expert on this. I mean, the AP1000. Why is it the reactor of choice for these 10 large-scale reactors that President Trump has said they want to get started by 2030? Why should it be the AP1000 and not another type of reactor?
So it's two things. The first one is the industry, including us, for years have this misconception of what drives the cost of nuclear power plants. And everybody thinks it's these fancy nuclear components, steam generators, reactor vests. It's not. Construction craft labor and construction makes over 60% the cost of the plants. All the nuclear components make less than 10%. And that's where you see the advantage of the AP1000, because per megawatt, you need less concrete, you need less steel, you need less cable, in the order of a factor of 3 or 4 lower than any competing technology. And that's because of the investment that not just Westinghouse, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Department of Energy have made in the 90s and early 2000s on developing those approach to passive modular technologies that allows you to build the plants with less resources and therefore drive down the cost. That's why it's emerging as the technology of choice. Even when we look at our observations on the Chinese construction program, there's only 2 reactors that are being built. One is the AP1000 in their CAP 1000 version. The other is what they call a Hualong 1, which is a variant of the workhorse of our current nuclear fleet, the 3-loop Westinghouse reactor. To build AP1000, it's less than half the people that you need on site. And that's where the big advantage comes. And then from a safety perspective, the use of natural phenomena rather than components. increases the safety level of the plants, but also allows you to reach in the first cycle of operation the same performance and availability that on the operating fleet took us almost 40 years to get to.
But like any technology is out there, our biggest challenge, and you've heard this time and time here today, is resources, right? The engineering capability, the technical capability, welders, constructors. Our challenge today is to start educating those individuals now so that we're ready when we start building multiple nuclear power plants, that we have all the right talent and people available for that. That's going to be a massive challenge for us.
I stay on that for a second, because that's electricians, not electrical engineers. That's welder, not mechanical engineers. Right. We have the engineering talent to sustain this project. We need the people that are going to build them. And I think you'll have a panel after this one on the application of AI. That's important to understand. It's not just the driver for the need of energy. It's also what's going to enable us. We are not going to beat the rest of the world by putting more people in a trench. That's not the American way. We're just going to make our workers better, which means making those electrician, pipe fitter, welders, carpenters career state-of-the-art jobs. That's where we should be deploying the technology, wearable technology, artificial intelligence. All these things needs to go augment those people so that they are empowered, and these are very good paying job. I mean, an electrician makes as much as an electrical engineer nowadays.
Sorry, I want to jump in here one more time because this is important. And you think about this as you start building these power plants, you're going to have literally thousands of temporary jobs that come into the state. And all of the needs of those individuals that have to be met, housing, you can go right down the list. So there's so many things that have to be determined and thought through to make sure that this is done the right way. It's a monumental task.
And one of the ironies is, of course, a lot of these nuclear plants will be there to serve the power demand created by AI, but you're using AI, I understand, in Westinghouse to speed up the process of regulation, but also development of the AP1000. Maybe you could mention that and talk a bit about that.
Yeah, but if I steal the thunder of the next panel, I'm never going to hear the end of it. But yes, so just as an introduction to the next panel, that's the key, right? How do we actually, if you look at it, one of the challenges for construction is construction is an inefficient business. And I've been with numerous tours making fun of the fact that sometimes you see entire crews of people sitting by the side of a road to wait for something to happen. But that's because the transfer of information is too slow on those projects. You find the problem, you have to send a request back to engineering, you have to get, or you miss a piece of equipment, it has to go to a warehouse to be provided. What AI allows us to do as we develop for this new construction is that the fundamental acceleration of that communication process in which you make things available to construction so that you have less idle time. It's as simple as that. You are using it to reduce that idle time. And that's why these projects in South Carolina are so important. All the rest of those multiple units we are discussing will be in the manufacturing phase for the next 3 to 4 years. But here we have the opportunity of start testing some of those construction tools as we develop them and training a workforce that will not stop at VC Summer, will go build all the next generation of nuclear power plants all over the United States. And the fact that it's right in the middle of that crescent where most of the power demand here, that goes from Virginia through the Carolinas to Georgia and then down to Texas, is just a perfect spot.
Going back to competition for the AP1000, I mean, you guys are creating or developing an SMR as well. And a lot of the hype that we've seen over the last year and a half, 2 years on the stock market has been about SMR developers. So why are SMR developers not the perfect solution to meeting the AI demand situation? I don't know, Mitch or Luca could maybe handle that.
I think that the answer to that one's actually kind of simple. SMRs were, a couple of years ago, were kind of the direction we were going with the AI and the data centers. However, it's literally been 2 to 3 years. Data centers were between 50 and 150 megawatts. They have literally leapfrogged from 150 megawatts to 500 megawatts to a gigawatt. And in that process, the SMR or the 300 megawatt units have become less desirable, and it's easier for them to really transition into the much bigger unit. And it's a key component to really what is the genesis behind all of this. It's really load growth. We haven't seen load growth in this country, like true load growth in this country, for a decade, right? It's been maybe some pockets of load growth, but real load growth has been pretty flat. The data centers have been the driver behind all of this. The data centers and the size that they're getting to today are the genesis. I mean, they go to a utility today like Sandy Cooper and others, and they look at a data center, a gigawatt data center, and their answer is, I don't have the energy. I have to find it. You've heard it several times here today. We have to find a way to supply clean, dispatchable, firm. When I say firm, we've transitioned from energy reliability to energy security, which is what nuclear brings to the table for these customers. These customers want clean energy and they want firm delivery. And this is the primary solution for it. Not the only solution. Let's be very clear here today. Nuclear power is just a piece of the answer, right? It's not the whole answer. There will always be natural gas. There will always be other renewable supply. There will be hydro, which we own a ton of. But nuclear is going to play a significant role here, right? And we've got to make sure that we build these power plants efficiently and at a reasonable price, because even hyperscalers, they're economic animals at the end of the day. They're going to pick the right solution, economic solution for them, and we have to make sure nuclear power fits it within that equation.
I think that's the key, right? Is your question of if we think the AP1000 is so good, why we're investing in a small modular reactor or even in micro reactors, because we're also investing in that. In part of the answer is what Mitch said, is that holy grail fallacy in which you think that if I have something that works, that's going to do everything. No, a stable electrical system, nuclear does not replace gas. Nuclear and gas cooperate together. They stabilize your electricity mix together with renewable, hydro, solar, wind. You need all those energy sources because the inherent interaction between them gives you a stable market that is more reliant to your fuel security supply because things change. And on the smaller, one of the challenges for small modular reactor is that quantities argument, right? Our most advanced small modular reactor, which is probably the more compact in the world, still needs about half the quantities of an AP1000 to generate about 30% the power. So if you have a grid that can take a gigawatt, your answer is obvious. But not all grids are designed similar. Not all challenges in the world are designed similar. That's why you need those projects. Now, we also want to make sure we don't keep embarking in first of a kinds without actually achieving first nth of a kind. But that's why you do those things. Micro reactor, on the cost per megawatt, per kilowatt hour, they are going to be higher. But there are places where you can't connect to a large grid, where you don't have a 700, 500 or 750 kV line.
And you mentioned, gas. Obviously, it's a key solution. We have seen the price of gas going up. Our building gas plants, it's almost doubled, and we've got shortages in the supply chain there. It's really quite tricky at the minute. But when you look at what's the levelized cost of energy you've got to in China, for example, from the AP1000, is it close to a big gas plant here now, or is it still some way off?
No, I think it's close. I think, and it's the stability of the mix, right? When you look at your cost per kilowatt hour generated, fuel makes a very small percentage of kilowatt hours generating by a nuclear plant. So it tends to be more stable to those fuel changes. Different situation for gas, of course. So it really depends also in where are you building? What's your transportation cost to get the gas there? In what locations are you? But if you look and project it, again, those numbers that we showed, that reduction of 50 to 60% going to nth of a kind, that's why those ITC, those government investment, that's the current administration plan, is to prime it, get it started, and then let it industrialize and takes care of itself.
So obviously we're in South Carolina, and I got a lovely visit to the VC summer site yesterday, which was fantastic. So what role do you think that site and South Carolina can play in this nuclear resurgence that we're seeing and in the rollout of these AP1000s?
Oh, look, I think it's a critical role. We've heard it here several times today. It will be the first two that get built. There's no doubt in my mind. And again, it is dependent on the government transaction that we've closed. We plan on moving forward with that as long as all the first phase of this project continues to substantiate our analysis on the economics of making this project work. But it is the first, and I think it's important that we start building new nuclear. And it's, you heard the governor say it's common sense. At the end of the day, we at Brookfield like to use our common sense too. And this seems like it's a bit of a no-brainer for us.
And from Westinghouse perspective?
I'll just answer quickly. It's to put it in perspective, I'm responsible for all new plants project for Westinghouse. My office is in South Carolina. That
makes sense.
That should answer. That it's going to be it's the middle of the U.S. crescent as a unique industrial basis and capacity, and it has a strong nuclear background, including what's probably the most valuable asset right now in nuclear in this country, which is the VC Summer site.
So I've spent the last 2.5 years writing about partisan politics in the United States to do with energy. But this is actually an area where there does seem to be some bipartisan support, which is great and very helpful for companies and investment. Is that because nuclear is seen as very important from an energy security perspective? Maybe, Mitch, could you talk a little bit about that? You know, why is it important to get nuclear built out here?
Yeah, you know, I think it is. I think what we've seen happen over the last couple of years with the Russia-Ukraine war and the impact that it had on Europe as it relates to energy security is a lesson that we've all learned, right? And I believe that part of that lesson is, again, you go back to, you need a diversified fuel mix within the United States. You need it anywhere, right? You're going to always have all these different types of technology. But the one place that we have fallen short, and the rest of the world is actually ahead of us here. You've heard about it in China and Czech Republic and Poland, is the advancement of new nuclear. So it's important for us to build these projects. But part of that is to make sure that we hold on to the race as it relates to keeping AI data centers here. Part of it relates to the Trump administration's goal of moving new manufacturing back to the United States, which most of this is big users of electricity. They're not going to come unless they get good, clean, reliable sources of electricity. We have to build these projects. It's pretty simple.
I mean, one of the things I always think when I'm writing about nuclear is that when you sign these deals, it's an 80-year, commitment, and it's American technology going overseas. It creates that sort of bind between countries, so it's a diplomatic tool almost. Now, Westinghouse is doing a lot of work over in Europe and China. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. I mean, are you seeing? Are the Europeans keen to get the technology, for example, and how does it help build relationships?
So if you're correct, if you look at the areas of the world where we see deploying and growth of nuclear power are North America, and then that Central Eastern European set of countries, and then of course the growth that we forecast in the Middle East. Asia, it's almost self-sufficient right now in terms of the Chinese are building their own plants, the Koreans are building their own plants. In Europe, that has been a focus for Westinghouse, both in terms of creating a diversity of supply of fuel, going back to that fuel security aspect. Following the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, Westinghouse has started making fuel for legacy Russian reactors that now we supply to all those countries so that they don't have to go have the only option of go buying it from the Russian. In terms of new plants, that's where the AP1000 advantage comes. And I think, Jamie, in that these are sovereign projects. You look at some of these countries like Bulgaria, one of these projects is 20% of the country GDP. Mm-hmm. So it creates relationship between countries and between those countries and the United States that does provide geopolitical stability. And that's why the US government is so engaged in ensuring that relationship. On the other side, this creates actually access for United States industries to those countries, because one of the characteristics of the AP1000 compared to other type of technologies is the modular construction and the components are identical. The one in VC Summer and the one in Poland are exactly the same. There's no difference between them. In fact, the ones on all the new ones are going to be exactly the same as the one that we have at VC Summer, which also allows, as we develop the rest of the project, should we identify components that we need to procure, it's not a project that is left alone with an obsolete supply chain. It's actually a project that is just the forefront of a massive manufacturing development in this country.
And I wondered about the supply chains. I mean, can you pick from the Chinese supply chain? That might be a bit tricky, I would suspect. But a European supply chain, I mean, where are you getting the parts from? And how long will it take to build up that American supply chain?
In the United States. See, when people talk about modular construction, they think it's something that is only for nuclear. But steel, composite steel, concrete construction is no different than what shipyards in the United States have been building for decades. The shield building in the AP1000, which is a marvel of engineering, which in 3 feet of concrete can stop an airplane, that was built in Virginia at Newport News Shipbuilding and then delivered to the site and then installed by American workers. And because of the nature of that construction, pretty much every component in an AP1000 is either made in the United States or come from allied countries like Korea, Japan, or the European Union. And 80% plus, 95% plus of projects are actually all American jobs. And the advantage you have is you industrialize it, and then you save, because transportation cost is what makes it competitive. You have them right there in that crescent that cost a lot less to move things.
And one of the big policy changes in the United States under the Trump administration has been tariffs. Did Brookfield look at that when they considered, all these deals in the nuclear sector, and how does tariffs impact?
You mean as it relates from importing equipment from other countries?
Yeah.
Look, I think that's something absolutely we have to consider when we think about procurement of parts or equipment. And to Luca's point, our goal would be to have the major components built and constructed here in the United States, so that obviously we don't have to worry about the tariff or any tariff risk as it relates to that. But there will be some components that we have to import. That's just part of how this all will work.
Yeah. I suppose one issue that we have been focusing on a lot, and Doug Burgum has been mentioning, is this AI race. We're competing against China. How are we really in danger of losing it? How tight is this race right now? And particularly in relation to nuclear, it looks like China is ahead of us at the minute. How long will it take to catch up in that aspect?
It's a good question. I don't think anybody can give you a great answer. Maybe these two guys that are coming up next will give you an answer, the Google guys or the hyperscalers. I can tell you this. They're economic animals, right? At the end of the day, they're going to go where they can get the best total solution for their investment, right? And it's our jobs to make sure that we are competitive. And the only way we can be competitive and check all the boxes that they're asking for is to make sure they have clean fuel security, firm supply, and deliverability on energy at a reasonable price for term, right? And we're talking 25, 30-year type long-term contracts. So If we can't deliver that economically, they will definitely find another place. They're just like anybody else. They'll find a home for it. And I'm guessing I'm not an AI or I'm not an expert on how long it takes for information to go from one side of the world to the other. But I'm sure the Chinese can be competitive here, and we wouldn't see much of a difference in their services.
And Luca, just on the nuclear side, we were talking last night about how actually they have sort of done a tweak to the AP1000. They've got a cap 1300. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and does that suggest that that's a better product?
So it's part of that is a country want to own the tech. One thing is having a technology and building something. Another thing is owning and understanding. So right now is what the Chinese are building is what's called the CAP 1000, which is essentially a minor variant of the AP 1000. Same plant, just a little bit cleaned up, some Chinese character, but it's the same plant for a practical purpose. But they have been developing what they call a CAP 1400 for indigenous use, which is a larger version of that. And I don't like to talk about other people, but Westinghouse, we're pretty convinced that the 1100 megawatt size is the right one for the electricity markets and customers and users in the Western world.
And Mitch, I mean, I've been crunching a few numbers on the amount of money going into nuclear. It's been quite phenomenal over the last while. SMRs, I think, got $3 billion of investment over the last year. You've got this $80 billion deal. So America is definitely pushing ahead. How much money do we need to deliver this renaissance?
TBD, I think, on the total number. I think that what we've got, though, is we've got what we would consider an excellent start to getting the project started, right? We're going to spend the next 6 months or so trying to figure out exactly what VC Summer is going to take to complete that construction. We're going to work with the U.S. government over the next number of months as well. I don't know exactly how long that term is, to come up with a real game plan to invest the $80 billion and to be very clear on what they expect to get out of that investment. It is, again, there hasn't been a lot of new nuclear here. We have a very good sense of what it takes to build these units in other parts of the world. And I don't suspect it'll be significantly different, but it's a great start. And the key to that $80 billion, I may have said it earlier, I just want to make sure that we all understand, it is getting the long lead time items started now, right? And having some certainty about the delivery of those items and the projects they go to, so that we can build these things within a reasonable amount of time, and it's not decades, it's 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, whatever it might be. And having multiple units running at a time, 4 or 5 units going COD, at a time, and then building up that portfolio so that we can continue. So there's a lot of questions still out there. There's a lot to be determined and to work through. But the key to this is we're started, right? This is started. This is real, and it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing the Financial Times has been very interested in is this idea of, the administration buying stakes in various companies. Yep. In this deal, there is this IPO plan potentially. It's quite a shift of U.S. policy, I guess. Is Brookfield comfortable with the way things are going?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, this is the only way to make this. This is the only paradigm in which it does work, right? That we can figure out. You have to have some sort of government involvement to help take that risk off the table, right? A big chunk of the risk off the table. It's the capital needed to get these projects going. And with them willing to put up this $80 billion, that gets these projects started. And that's the key behind all of this. And again, I hope this room is 3 times as many people next year, 2 years from now. 5 years from now, we'll look back and think about this conversation and look at all the projects that are actually in design, in construction, and we'll think, you talk about stars getting aligned. That will be a fantastic day.
And Luca, maybe the final word, VC Summer, it's going to be the first, is it? And how many more can you roll out across this country?
So VC Summer is personal for us. I've started working on the AP1000 in 2013. I'm 648 on completing them. I would like to get my last two before I retire in terms of getting it to 8 of 8. I think it's going to be that jump start. But that's the unique thing about nuclear. People think it takes a lot to build nuclear power plants. No, it takes a lot to build the first. The Chinese are already bringing online 5 to 6 units every year. We project that with the type of efforts and the type of investments that are being done, the United States can easily match that and having 4 to 5 of these units coming online by the late 2030s.
Great. I think I'll leave it on that optimistic note. Thank you so much to my guests, Mitch and Luca. Thank you.
Thank you.